Farhan, we can continue the discussion. Only a few people have made it back after lunch because clearly, as people were exiting, they found the dessert cart and realized that there's sorbet on offer, so that will delay people a little longer. I'm sure it would have delayed me, but I felt guilty if I didn't turn up because Terry had already left. Although I then managed to overtake Terry somehow and beat him to the room. So maybe a rift in time. Um, so yeah, I guess if I go backwards, in my slides a little, the sort of things that I want to cover are whether people think that this is a reasonable choice to make or very strange, and we should not go down this path. And what path should we go down if we want to support the wider Asia Pac community, or do we just? I mean, the previous deployment model, I was involved in sort of eduroam growing from sort of 40 to about 110 economies. And Europe was largely sewn up. And I came to Terrainer at the time as an Australian, and the map actually had Australia coloured and most of Europe covered. And that was about it. Not even the US. The US actually came, strangely enough, the US and Canada ended up getting connected via Australia for a period of time because Europe somehow wasn't ready to take on looking after other territories. And it was only because an ex-Janet staffer went to Australia and sort of connected ARNet sort of behind the scenes, did Australia have it? And so there was some resistance to global eduroam. And so I'll tell you my deployment. Yeah.
Membership fee? No. Okay. When I asked for eduroam access, ARNet asked us to join as member. I wonder they treat US the same.
No, and I think for some things they actually make Rianne's buy some services from them for connectivity to get it connectivity pertain, but they don't sell eduroam to Rianne's, so Rianne's doesn't pay a member fee. But yeah, ARNet is reasonably strict on at least its national members, and that was just a thing to grow eduroam at the time. So I don't think eduroam was necessarily seen because deployment was so low that it wasn't really a service that can make money. It flew under the radar. It was just technical people connecting other technical sites. And so the work that I did, usually it was me finding one interested engineer somewhere, in a country, either at a university, or maybe there was an NREN, but someone interested and had the ability to install a radius proxy server, often alongside their DNS resolver. So this is before even, virtual machines. So you had to take up like a real machine and you needed a stable IP address. And so the option really was your DNS resolvers or your authoritative DNS servers were the only stable machines that had a low usage that could also be a radius proxy. And so then I would negotiate with Paul Deckers, the head of the eduroam operational team at SurfNet. I'd say to Paul, can you allow this IP address range to peer with the European top-level radius with this shared secret? And then Paul would put that configuration in place, and we would test to see if there's errors, if there's firewalls in place and things like that. People would always say there's no firewall. There inevitably was, and it always takes some time to work out what the packet loss problem was. And then over time, that would stabilize and we'd get that working. and then they'd deploy a local radius server. I would test from my end, they would test from their end. We would exchange test accounts. And once we had proven that this worked, we had our first sort of eduroam territory connected. And we repeated that for, 70 odd, territories, right? That was the deployment profile. It wasn't well formalized, but it was like Paul and I had an understanding of getting people connected. And without someone with the remit to bother to connect people, that's sort of not going to happen. And we know from, the slides that I had and the slides that Farhan had, that a lot of colleges don't have the infrastructure. If you're a small economy and you don't have a research network, then even the virtual machine to run a radius proxy in your territory that has a live IP address, that has external connectivity, that's difficult because in the region we don't have IP addresses spare, and giving up an IP address pair for a radius server, lots of people, lots of economies are running only on heavily natted commodity internet services from commercial companies. And so they don't have the ability to host, services with live IPs. And so we would love to all do V6 everywhere, but that's not the case. We have to do things to accommodate those groups. So, yeah. So this is my plan for a project. So maybe in the coming weeks, I'm not too sure. I can't remember the time frame of ISIF grants. They usually announce somewhere around February, March, and they have about a 6-week opening time to develop your consortium and your application. And then so the idea is that we would focus on eduroam, focus on a confederation, focus on mapping territories that exist and trying to map institutions, and then put infrastructure in place to allow institutions to connect to eduroam in the absence of an NREN or a roaming operator. And so I'd like your thoughts or your commentary on whether this is a good idea, impossible, and we shouldn't go down the path, or whether we should take some other path. Because for me, this is the only thing I can think of. Oh, Pal wants the microphone. So no, we'll take Pal first, and then if we got anyone online.
So I have a question, very simple question. What do you mean with confederation?
So, yeah, because at the moment, people can only apply as a territory in their own right. And those territories have to then request of the GEGC membership. And so I want a Asia Pac confederation to vacuum up all of the unserved country code top level domains in the region.
So you're talking about a regional NRO, more or less.
A regional, yes. Yeah. So we don't. Yeah, I mean, we have a radius proxy for Australia and Hong Kong that covers the region, but all of the default realms for the region don't get allocated to them. So we want just a simpler mechanism to default connect those up, and then hopefully the confederation will be of value that existing members would also, want to join, so that we would have our own. I think the only sort of large scale eduroam event is Mobility Day. It happens at TNC, so there's nothing that happens in the region other than. Oh, right. Okay, but that's a single. Well, depending on your, depending on your global expansion plans of Internet 2, they are just the NREN of the United States. So they're not, yeah. Equally, SurfNet would have something at Relatiedagen, which is just obviously supporting only the Dutch community.
So this meeting is more or less the equivalent to Mobility Day.
Yeah, I mean, this is there are the fora are either APAN or APNIC, or maybe SANOG. We have some NOG events, Network Operator Group events, that I think actually the value of eduroam as a proof of concept on how open roaming actually works is actually also of interest to network operator groups, right? The fact that I think James Cook University in Townsville in Australia worked with Telstra to do a citywide open roaming service. So they wanted, obviously, the university wanted eduroam on the public Wi-Fi, and the telephone operator Telstra didn't want that. They wanted to run run their own SSID for their own brand, but they were willing to run an open roaming compatible network, of which eduroam and Hideaki mentioned CityRoam is compatible with open roaming. eduroam is compatible with open roaming. And Farhan actually has a deployment case where you actually deploy an open roaming, a CityRoam compatible network to prove that you can use eduroam on both, right? So you get this interoperability. And this means that in places like airports where SSID is a limited commodity and often used for branding, because a company will want to call the Wi-Fi T-Mobile Secure or whatever after their company name, you can make those networks open roaming compatible so that eduroam will work on them. And the user that uses eduroam cat or Let's Eduroam automatically connects, as Farhan said, pending this Android issue that some devices are now experiencing. But the bonus of eduroam as a global community is when this problem gets solved in one aspect, it gets solved for everyone, right? So as a campus, you're not trying to solve it yourself. So that's the view. Hopefully all of the existing eduroam roaming operators in the region would also want to join the Confederation, simply because we already have representation to the governance committee, and we could better consolidate that so that it's a more active and more functional community, and we can put in the building blocks for large scale deployment, because eduroam's only really going to work if we have significant deployment per territory, so that there's value in using it and there's experience and shared experience. I don't think if we're not going to get high levels of adoption, and I mean, in Australia, it took a very long time to go down that path. Some universities were very resistant. And I think we heard, what was the example? I think it was Taurit was giving the example of some people don't deploy eduroam at home for their own users. So the first time you use it is when you go somewhere else, and then you don't even know that you were supposed to use that and the setup, and you have to try and find, you got to get on a guest network anyway, or maybe the hotel Wi-Fi, and look up the details of how you set up your device back for your home institution. And that's problematic. But with open roaming, if people want to do that, you don't have to run the eduroam SSID at your campus, pending your national rules. And because once upon a time, you could only do eduroam with the eduroam SSID, but now you don't have to. And it's actually really quite good. Your phone will just magically connect to these other SSIDs, and your phone will say it's, I think, what does the Sifulan one say, Farhan? It says something like powered by eduroam or something.
Yeah, if you're using Let's Wi-Fi portal, the default will name of the open roaming SSID via your realm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's really quite interesting to look at it on your phone, because if you just sit there with your laptop and you list the SSIDs, there's no eduroam SSID, but your phone and your laptop will actually connect to this non-eduroam SSID that is eduroam, that's open roaming compatible. And because you're using, so don't think that this is a bad thing. The security within Let's Eduroam means that you're only connecting to a real eduroam hotspot, right? So if you run, if Pal turned his laptop into an eduroam hotspot and it didn't connect upstream, and it couldn't do that certificate verification, then you just wouldn't connect to it, right? And so this stops people. So this stops, rogue hotspot operators, or stops misconfigured. Sometimes people accidentally misconfigure a hotspot or break it, and using something like Let's Eduroam means that users don't fall into the trap of sending their usernames and passwords to an end service that is misconfigured for them.
Or the clients are misconfigured.
Yeah. So, so we're trying to, not hearing any comments from people, so I don't know if this is a good idea or not. So the other thing is, as part of the project, we have to look at sustainability. Now, you won't always get renewed funding forever. This is. Oh, Hideaki, yes, please speak.
Yes, I missed the first part. And where are the identities from? So it's easy to deploy the service provider's part, but we need identities. So where is the source?
Yeah, so we will take the source from anywhere and everywhere we can, including, hopefully the campus is something like Office 365, Microsoft Azure services, or they use the G Suite, the Google apps for education to hold identities, and we use that to authenticate towards a Let's Eduroam portal, Let's Wi-Fi portal, or we have to go down the some way of a domain verified account. So if your institution provides email, do authenticate people because they also have an academic email. Or if that doesn't work, we'll have to go down various methods to try and work out how do we give accounts to institutions that don't have this infrastructure. Because ultimately, we want everyone included, and we want to reduce the barrier, and no one is going to stand up an eduroam hotspot on their campus if they can't use it. So we need a mechanism to allow people, but campuses will range from having existing identities to having none, to having it in a spreadsheet that they upload, to maybe they'll have a SQL database or an LDAP source that can be pointed to. So there'll be a range of options, and they're obviously not good, but it's a step, because clearly the part two for this is trying to solve the identity federation puzzle piece, right? We want to get to, just because people have access to eduroam, that only solves one part of their collaboration in the R&E space. How do we get them to do SAML identity providers at scale also? So that's a second, that's a second component to tackle.
Okay, so the idea is to provide a kind of managed IDP service as well, and each institution is responsible with respect to the identity authorization or something?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I think that mechanism is quite useful even for the K-12.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it also could be used in a K to 12 scenario where people are supplied devices. So they only need
Yes.
managed accounts, like a managed device profile for
Yeah.
your whole, your Chromebook fleet or your iPad fleet or your Huawei MediaPad fleet or whatever you're deploying, in a way that they can easily manage those accounts, for a lifetime that aligns with the student use.
Ah,
Bro,
that's yeah, good.
actually,
Thank you.
when we introduced the Get eduroam, not the app, sorry, the Get eduroam pseudo credential, initially, we how to say, we create like a one portal and can accept any authentication from as long as within Sifulan Federation. So the portal can accept the authentication and will generate the eduroam credential. I think you have been using it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
in that case, so actually it doesn't really matter what is the realm, right? In that case, and if the only thing is that um so the IDP must be member of the federation, then there's some level of assurance over there.
Yep.
So yeah, that one model. So, but the problem with that model is that it's hard to apply some further advanced setting like different VLAN and so on because yeah, it's only one single realm, so means that can be considered as a guess. That's why now we more focus into the like tightly into how to say an organization. Each organization have their own dedicated portal. Although we can do optimization like virtual hosting and so on, so that less burden for the administrator.
Yeah. I mean, like, we won't solve every use case
Yeah.
initially in each step, right? But we're
Yes,
trying to
correct.
work out what is the majority use case that we
Mhm.
can solve. And
Mhm.
then once we do that, we know the second most popular use case, and we can look at
Yeah.
how to solve that set of users,
Mhm.
to get a better idea of,
Mhm.
how many technology stacks do we need to support to get. I
Mhm.
mean, there'll always be an instance where someone runs
Mhm.
something very esoteric.
Yeah.
Um,
And then I think there's a new update on the eduroam as well. I'm interested with when you say there's a fleet of devices. I think eduroam now starting to provide support for Chromebook as well. I have one testbed, but not Chromebook, the Flex OS. Yeah, it works quite well.
yeah. Yeah. So, once you find those use cases, then we can solve them and work out, a suite of additional testing, because I think like APNIC has done a lot of work on, uh, because they run testing in adverts in the browser, they get a really good idea of what sort of browsers are out there, what sort of support for quick, and things like that. So that and they know things like, vendor types, whether you're deploying Chrome or some customized version of Chrome or Samsung browser or an iPhone. And both AP and NIC have this information available as well as Cloudflare. So you get this information about the diversity. And so you'll see in different economies, you'll see in Australia, iPhone is very, very popular. So in richer territories, you'll often see iPhone being more popular, and in territories where their gross national income is lower, that Android becomes more popular, right? So you get this diversity of handsets simply because of the cost profile of them. But luckily, cheap handsets. Someone like Pal chooses to have a weird phone, and he comes from a country that he can afford a real one. Actually, your Samsung phones can be equally expensive. Brand new phones are ridiculously expensive from all of the vendors. But there are cheaper handsets in the Android camp than there are in the iPhone camp.
So you're right traditionally,
Mm.
but we are seeing more and more diversity from our side of the world.
Yeah.
People are getting more and more tired to be locked in.
Yes. I mean, that's someone like Samsung makes a lot of photo sharing apps and backup and storage apps so that they encourage your next Android phone to also be a Samsung Android phone, right? So that's what every vendor aims for. But it's working out that sort of fleet. Luckily, phones die over time, except if you're someone like me, you've got a cracked screen iPhone of old, because I'm both a cheapskate as well as wanting to be an iPhone user, except I can't use the latest operating system. So I miss out on features like passkeys and other cool security features. So that's the reason to upgrade in that regard. But, for eduroam deployment, it's very, very simple, because the common profile has been around for a while. I think as long as you've got Android greater than 9 of the API, you get passkeys and you get good support in the EAP and mobile configuration stakes. So it's increasingly difficult to have these older Android phones that don't work. But it's not going to be always the case. There's always cheaper handsets that use different operating systems. So I think that the Huawei phones have now been added to the eduroam CAT and the Let's Wi-Fi portal, so you can now support that group of phones. And we see that Huawei is one of our platinum sponsors for this event, and I've actually put my last sort of post-project sustainability thing on vendor compliance checks, because I think I won't mention the vendor, but at the last APAN meeting that I attended, that Farhan also attended, we were talking about a particular vendor that did not support all of the open roaming features, or users were reporting that there were instances where features did not work for their cloud offering. And so we would want potentially a way to verify that vendors are actually doing the right thing, that their documentation is accurate, and that potentially they were contributing towards the Confederation's documentation and sustainability by sponsoring as Wi-Fi vendors that want to sell into campuses, that they highlight the fact, and we highlight the fact, that their gear actually does work in this regard, right?
Yeah. Bro, actually, I want to add. Sorry, back to the get eduroam support for different type of phones. So for like Apple is not really a big problem, and for laptop Windows also not really a big problem, except there's some minor issue, but usually we only got this report like 1 or 2 every like 1,000 users due to the driver that it used. But Android is totally different. Okay, for example, like when I received some request for support from our get eduroam users here, when I reported back, that particular brand or some brand of this Android phone, it doesn't exist in Europe, or they don't market it for European market. So that's why they need to have help from us to troubleshoot and so on. It's vice versa. I mean, for example, when they test it in Europe, but that phone, it doesn't exist in our region. So also the thing. So I think kind of, if let's say the federation, I mean many users are using eduroam and use the get eduroam and give a better match feedback to the developer, then we may have a very solid get eduroam apps that make
Yeah.
eduroam much better. So, but recently, most of the issue is not with the eduroam, actually with the pass point that for certain model, Paul decided to just disable the pass point because that's the one that how to say become the problematic.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the thing, and I don't know, maybe because of the Android has a very vast model, and each vendor may have some certain of liberty to implement something, but apparently make even more difficult to support. Yeah, something like that.
The joy of family walking into the room. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's one of the things, right? Our deployment is different in Asia Pac because there are different vendors that exist. The current developers of Let's Wi-Fi don't have access to the same handsets, right? And we see different vendor handsets exist. And so we need other ways of supporting a wider range of vendors, and also within Asia, lobbying those manufacturers to make sure they update their phones and do support these types of technologies. And so because predominantly they all run on a version of Android Go, or some stripped down version of Android, but it's what they change that makes it more difficult for users to deploy. We have a comment in.
The post project, excuse me, the post project ideas are brilliant, very good ideas. Did you have in mind what will be the cost to the users, to the end users, and to the sub, because it's a huge maybe responsibility to take the eduroam outside the campuses. And
So
that can solve a lot of problems, because what we are using, we have more than, I think, 20,000 users on the campuses.
Yep.
But most of the researcher and student, when they go outside the campus in evening, they need another connectivity. So they're actually now using two services, one from the inside the campuses or premises of the university, and also keeping two is very difficult for people. So this is a brilliant idea. If we can have an open roaming system, city roaming, and this is, but the cost mainly.
yeah, so obviously the end user, the staff and the student, are required to pay nothing, right? So when they roam, it doesn't mean that they can't be charged a levy by their home institution for connectivity, but that's a campus decision. So that campus can't charge, for visitors, but some campuses certainly, as part of your service and amenities fees or your enrollment fees, or sometimes they make it explicit and sometimes they hide it. But part of your tuition cost or the cost of employment is part of that. So the missing middle, right? People have Wi-Fi at home, people have eduroam on campus, and then there's this missing middle of when they travel between the two. And so in Sweden, the research network actually pays for I think it's like Sky Broadband or something. It's a division of Sky within Sweden that runs a lot of access points commercially at bus stations, airports, cafes, railway stations. Yep. And so they pubs, yes. So they offer, they pay the bill, and that's made available. And so the NREN believes that's a value to the community, to their community. For that, they also pay the bill if I end up in Sweden, I will get connected to Wi-Fi there, and that bill is also paid for by the NREN. But that may not be sustainable in every territory. The cost varies wildly, and the payment model was per unique user per month. And that's becoming increasingly difficult to measure because the privacy extensions on your phone cause your MAC address to get randomized so you look like a new person when you move between a railway station and a pub, because they don't want, they don't want you tracked. The user doesn't want to be tracked between those locations, but that lack of tracking means that you're now two people rather than you are one unique person, which increases the cost. So that's difficult. And now with the cost of cellular, cellular is getting cheaper and cheaper in many countries. People don't pay for roaming. The cost of buying a local SIM here in Thailand is very, very cheap. You get a very good service. And so it's hard to justify having eduroam in many locations, on the trains, in other public spaces, because that infrastructure is costly. Or there might be, I was in the Philippines recently, and so they have a Wi-Fi for all project, where where the government pays for open Wi-Fi in public spaces. So this service is available in a lot of locations, but it's open Wi-Fi. You don't need an account. The downside is, because you don't need an account, they don't get any telemetry on whether the service works or whether the service is used. And so they actually now want to move it to a model much more like eduroam, so that people have privacy-preserving device-specific accounts, but they can use that to work out, no one has logged in from this access point for 3 weeks. It's probably broken, right? We're not getting any telemetry. We've not got any authentication. It's possibly broken. We can bother to fix it. So the government is paying for this infrastructure, but they don't have any idea of whether the infrastructure works. So they want to move to a model where it is able to be measured, because they can measure it in their bank account. They see the money going to the commercial providers to run the service, but they don't know whether the citizenry is benefiting from the service. And so in Sweden, Anders Nilsson did a lot of work on the accounting traffic side of a radius to verify that the link is working. Oh, yeah.
Based on that, what Herr Nilsson has done, we also get the monthly tracking on how many users, due to that reason that we have that telemetry. So we don't care about the MAC addresses in those cases, but you need to really figure out how to measure things nowadays.
And so for this proposal,
the main outcome should be like this. Everybody should get connectivity. That is the main. In the eduroam, this actually make it possible that you are connected. Okay, so why not something like we do reverse engineering? In some countries, like in ours, there are a lot of good services providers, internet services providers, like Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi from the government also. But there are good services providers. They have a good system. It's a private-based companies. So, they have quality that's very good. So why not we join hands with them and we ask them, they can use our services, eduroam, or their users, when they come to our premises or nearby our premises, and then when our users, they go to their premises, they can use their services. That can reduce the total cost for the internet connectivity, or availability, or accessibility. So that is one idea.
I mean,
how we can work on this.
You need a compelling reason for commercial providers to ever want to do that, right? And one of the best examples I found was HANet in Ireland. So they partnered with, I can't remember whether it was the second most popular cellular operator or the third most popular cellular operator. But if you are a mobile operator, your goal is to be the most popular, right? And the way you become the most popular is you get a big install base. And so HEANet organized for cheaper SIMs to be provided by, this third place mobile operator, and said that we'll make sure that students have eduroam on their handsets. They'll buy SIMs from you, and you will make eduroam available on hotspots that you control as the mobile operator. So people are paying a subscription, and for that mobile operator, it's much cheaper to carry traffic on Wi-Fi than it is over the air, because you want over the air traffic sold to business customers. You want the business customers to have the high quality of service, and you want the students to get, and staff to get offloaded onto Wi-Fi whenever possible, right? But they're paying for the subscription service, so they also get cellular. And so this allowed, a mobile operator to get a bigger user base, because they were willing to sell to students and academic staff at a lower rate. They got the installed handsets, they got the subscription fees, and then they were able to offload people onto Wi-Fi. So instead of carrying their data over cellular, which they were obliged to do anyway, because the person is a customer, but in cafes and bus stops, they were able to offload them. So there's a lot of these different business models that we'll be able to explore, and they're really territory based. It's unlikely that you can do it in a large way. But which economy are you from? Pakistan. Okay. And so so different territories will have different success in being able to do that. But then this is a compelling, because we now have open roaming, right? You have all of these other mechanisms of being able to support eduroam users in other locations. And so that's what we want to explore. But paying for public Wi-Fi locations can be difficult. But this program in the Philippines, they have this open Wi-Fi in public locations, and they've decided it doesn't work because they don't know. They need the stats. So they're likely going to move this towards an open roaming environment, which means they'll be able to allow eduroam users in all of these public spaces. And the current problem in the Philippine service is every location has a different SSID depending on the provider. So that makes roaming difficult for the user, but open roaming makes it easy.
I actually recently joined the Higher Education Commission in Pakistan, so I'm new to this group. Mostly my things related to academics, artificial intelligence, but I used to be the president, vice chancellor of university, so I have a lot of queries from the students. So there's another project that I heard about, is the Starlink low orbit satellite communication by Elon Musk. So this is also coming. So what will be the future of a connectivity like this, when there's a mega project which can give satellite-based communication everywhere in the world?
Yeah, I mean, so Optus, which is not the predominant carrier in Australia, owned by Singtel of Singapore, but Optus has signed a deal with Starlink to support 5G handsets in Australia. So that's rolling out this year. It'll start with text messages. So you'll be able to use SMS everywhere in Australia. You see Australia, right? But nearly everyone lives within 70 kilometers of the coast, right? And the vast interior has no one. And I once, foolishly on Christmas Day, I drove from here to here, not in a straight line because there aren't roads. I had to go a long way. But there's actually large portions of that drive where you have no mobile phone connectivity. And my sat-nav told me to drive through a national park to make my drive 200 kilometers shorter. And as soon as I entered that national park, the road was gravel, and I noticed I had no mobile connectivity. And I decided to drive 200 kilometers longer. So I would be on a sealed road and I would have, well, I still didn't have mobile connectivity, but if I broke down and I was on a sealed road, I would find a truck eventually. And so I did this journey and I came back. And after I came back, we had huge storms in Australia, lots of rain, so much rain that the interior of Australia sprung green. And they actually had to move the filming of Mad Max Fury Road to Africa, right? Because everywhere they picked in Australia was a desert, and now it was a desert with flowers. And they were like, we can't film a desert landscape with flowers. It won't fit this apocalyptic world. But someone who also, I owned a Toyota, this is before Google Maps, right? Toyota tried to send me through this national park. Some people coming the other direction towards South Australia, their four-wheel drive sent them through this national park as well. And the rain, but they had mobile phone access on the far side of the national park, which was a bonus. They got stuck for 3 days in flooded water and they could not get a helicopter to them because the storms were so bad, right? And so, Australia is big and you don't have connectivity, right? Because it's just impossible. But Optus are going to be providing text messaging services, and later it's going to be voice. It's going to be start being text message services so that you'll actually have connectivity provided by Starlink to be able to get access. And so Starlink is going to be quite a game changer for rural areas because their commodity service is very, very cheap and their business service is getting better. And they now have a 10 gigabit service. If you have enough money, at $75,000 a month, you can get a 10 gigabit service from Starlink, anywhere on the planet to anywhere rural, as long as you have the $1.2 million setup cost. And so you have to prepay the $1.2 million, but once you've paid for that, you can get a 10 gig service into anywhere in Pakistan, in the absolute interior.
But that's also extremely. Well, Pakistan is also, is a lot of mountains on one side, north especially.
Yeah.
It's starting from 50 miles away from Islamabad all the way to the China border. So
Yeah.
400 plus miles is the whole mountain.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to take fiber optics or any other kind of. And the weather is also not friendly in that area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of erosion in the mountains, earthquake, and
Yeah.
other things. So you always need something like a satellite communication or a microwave based, the old system.
Yeah.
That would be ideal
And-
rather than having a fiber optics kind of, because it's difficult to go there. And also the population is very limited in those areas.
Yeah.
We have hardly say 50,000 students in that area in the whole 400 miles. So putting a lot of money, a lot of finance to that would not be that much useful as compared to the heavy populated areas.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of challenges like this. So I think the satellite one-time investment, that would be very expensive but possible. I think that would be one of the possible solutions.
So satellite coverage is quite interesting based on geolocations, of course.
Yeah.
We have seen parts of Sweden where we don't have satellite coverage because of how the topographic is. So in the mountain ranges, we have large problems with satellites.
If you're interested in Starlink, Chihu's left the room, unfortunately, but I'm going to plug the AP Nick Ping podcast. So there's I don't know what episode, maybe 53, a reasonably recent episode on Starlink that came out in December. And it's, strangely enough, you don't have Starlink coverage straight into the sky. So the reason that PAL has this problem in mountainous parts of Sweden, you actually have it for 15-second duration only, far east to far west in a few degrees. You don't have Starlink as it passes overhead. So you have to capture, because you interfere with other satellites other geostationary satellites straight up. So they don't talk straight up, they talk, you know, east and west. And so you have this only a few degrees of coverage. And obviously, if you're in a valley, you don't get enough of the horizon. So there are places where it doesn't work. So you need to mount the dish higher, right? Or mount it on the top of a hill and relay the service further down, because with 5G and Wi-Fi and things like that. I mean, other 3 billion do this. O3b have a service, and they have fewer satellites. And obviously Amazon's Kuiper, is it Kuiper? But Amazon have a service. They're actually using SpaceX's rockets to launch their satellites, but they're launching a competitor service. And so the market will now open up, that there'll be price competition. From what I've seen is Starlink seem to charge the same price the world over. So $100 a month for the commodity household service. So it's the same thing. In Australia, it's 120, 160 Aussie a month. You know, if you do the translation, it always ends up at $99 a month, sort of thing for the domestic service. So the price is consistent no matter where you are. But you can obviously work with Starlink to get ground stations and make sure that your academic network peers with those ground stations. And so once you do that, then there's faster access for R&E services for those users, right? Starlink is very interested in peering with everyone. You know, they want to reduce their bandwidth costs as well. And so they will want to go to internet exchange points in your country and everywhere, because they obviously need to buy a lot of bandwidth, but they also need to go to internet exchange points to make it cheaper. So that won't necessarily solve the eduroam problem, but your Starlink dishes can be eduroam hotspots if you want. And I saw a very interesting project in Uganda. Uganda have these MiFi devices. You know, you sometimes when you travel, maybe you own them yourself. You get a little device that does 5G and it outputs Wi-Fi. They worked with a Chinese manufacturer to make a device that does eduroam on the box and connects to cellular service. And so they make it available for schools in Uganda. $50 a month is the cost, unlimited bandwidth, because the NREN has peered at all of the POPs of the cellular operator, so they can take the traffic. And they provide this. This is getting used in schools that don't have power, right? So there's a school that doesn't have power. The device operates for 10 hours fully charged, and they can use tablets in the school to do, to get access to digital content. So you've got a school with no power, and yet they have internet access. And so that's like, I was very impressed. I went and spent almost 2 weeks at RENU, the Ugandan NREN, and I thought they would need a lot of assistance, right? I thought I was going there to bring them so much knowledge, and wow, they are just very impressive. They had really built a lot of customized services, and for eduroam, they had a program where people could connect their cafe Wi-Fi or whatever, their hotspots. They could connect them and offer eduroam. So they were offering a very simple service to get eduroam deployed in a lot of places to support those communities. And so it was like, wow, these guys really understand it, because they had a big problem in COVID. The university campuses were shut down, and a lot of people still needed access to connectivity. And so they had projects where they would even buy or pay for internet access in various locations, as long as the Wi-Fi side of those access points did eduroam, and people could use the Ethernet connections for their own business. So yeah, I think there are probably a lot of different opportunities, and NRNs need to, try and get creative on what will solve the needs of their people. So I don't know. Where do we go from here? I've written down, I'm going to approach some various people for letters of support and to continue to flesh out the proposal ahead of ISIF opening their funding grant round. There's no guarantee that we will get funding, right? It's a very it's a well-known program. Unfortunately, they get a lot of very good applications. I only say that because I have submitted 3 unsuccessful applications, and I think mine were very good. So I hope I don't miss out a 4th time, but I fully understand that that's a reality. And I can 100% commit to you that this project will not happen if money doesn't rain from the sky, right? I'll let anyone else take on the work, but unfortunately, my cats eat a lot of food, and I need some way of keeping them in the luxury they have become accustomed. And so Hideaki has raised his hand. Hideaki, speak.
Yes, I'd like to know where is the best place to discuss. So we have many technical discussions. So is the Slack appropriate, or do we have another place?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have an eduroam specific mailing list for the region that I know of. Slack for people that are in Apan Slack, or do you mean eduroam Slack? There's also so many Slack environments to speak.
Yeah, the emails so noisy, so I prefer Slack.
Yeah. So I think so people can email me and I can give you an account for Slack if you don't have Slack. If you do not have Slack at all and you definitely do not want to use it, then I can periodically email people to keep them abreast of the work we're doing. But I think that eduroam, the APAN Slack channel is probably as good as any at this point in time.
Okay, thanks.
What? Yeah, I did not promote it. So maybe I should find it and add people. I'm surprised anyone is a member of it. Oh, Hideaki and Chihu, yes. So I'll mention it here. Okay, so I've sent a thing to the TFI for those. There's 72 people in TFIAM Slack. People will be encouraged to join that. Otherwise, where is Zoom? What's 4 people? You join now. Okay. Okay. Farhan, the day is ending for Farhan. Okay. So we'll get back to better understanding what the so this is me. This is one of the many ways you can contact me, but it's the shortest email address I've ever had. No, I used to have b@uq.oz.au, but that's longer, isn't it? b@uq.oz.au. No, that was shorter. Because once upon a time, Australia used to have .oz as its top level domain, and the old uq.oz got grandfathered into uq.oz.au. And for some reason, the hostmaster team at UQ had a policy they would only issue single letter usernames. And when I joined the University of Queensland to the hostmaster team, there was no one with B as their name. And so I got B. That doesn't work anymore though, unfortunately, but it was good because it was very short to write. But you can email me if you want a Slack account. I can send you an invite for Slack and point you in the directions that you need to go. And so Farhan also mentioned there was some issue with Passpoint, the open roaming service, Passpoint and Hotspot 2.0 not working for some users, and it's been disabled for iOS devices. And so, I mean, that's one thing that we need to work out how to solve for our region, because we don't want that to be the case. Right? We want, if people are going to use open roaming and work with commercial partners to increase the deployment of eduroam, then it needs, open roaming is an important part. As I mentioned, the James Cook University and Telstra project in Townsville in Australia, that's requiring eduroam users to also be able to interoperate with open roaming. Member fees are an obvious way of trying to make the project sustainable. And I don't know how to do the financial model of this, but there are some territories that have benefited from eduroam for a very long time, and some people who have not benefited eduroam very long at all, who will be actually brand new. And so I would like, the mathematicians and the statisticians in the audience, if you can work out a good way of encouraging adoption, because we don't want, we don't want people to not do eduroam. We don't want the member fee to be a disincentive, but for those that have been long-term deployers and long-term beneficiaries of eduroam, then hopefully they will pay for the service. And there obviously will be some territories in Asia Pac that are rich. And I spoke with someone from Internet 2 recently that's working on some regional projects where there are some well-financed research networks that might be willing to contribute financially. But we know that that's not always going to be the case. And we can't have a situation where there's yet another member organization that you pay for and the member fees continually scale indefinitely, because we have to make sure that we show value. So that's why we would want, everyone's participation in the decision making of that, right? Because you can see Taurit nodding and going, "I'd love to be involved. If you put the prices up, right, then I'm either out of here or you have to, the reality is we have to provide more of a benefit to BDREN than the cost of being involved. It's a very simple equation, right? And if we stop providing value, then the various members will want to stop participating. I've written member fines here because I had this idea once when I was back in Europe. Some places don't do very good job of deploying eduroam. And so what I wanted to do is fine the roaming operator, fine the institution, whatever, some mechanism so that poor deployments, people are warned that their deployment is poor, that there's problems with it, and they correct it. And I mentioned this at a meeting once, and someone said, well, if you're going to charge us for not doing it wrong, we'll stop doing eduroam. And I said, that's perfectly acceptable. We do not want you to do a bad eduroam deployment. A bad eduroam deployment is sort of an insult to everybody that participates in eduroam, right? Every campus that does Wi-Fi correctly doesn't want eduroam at another campus to be poor and their students to have a bad experience. They don't want the help desk call, right? It's supposed to work and work consistently. And so we would want to, we would want the accounting traffic that Per Nielsen works with, and we've had a commitment from the Supercomputer Center at the University of Philippines in Diliman, Quezon City in Manila. They are willing to build like a machine classifier of good logs versus bad logs, so they can try and identify problems with eduroam deployments without without the overhead of humans having to look at logs, right? Because we want to scale this service, but we can't scale it with people. Yes.
I support the idea, but maybe you should do it the other way around, meaning that if you do good deployment, you have discount on membership fee, something like that.
Yeah.
I actually I totally agree with you, because sometimes when I heard from my colleagues saying that, hey, I stopped using eduroam because when I go to my son's school, the eduroam connection there sucks. Okay, but it's not good, because it's kind of like and discourage people to connect to eduroam. So I agree with you, but maybe when we implement it,
yes,
it's the other way around, giving people incentive rather than discourage people.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a franchise, like if you buy into a franchise like Domino's Pizza or Subway or Jollibee or Burger King, I called it Burger King. Anyway, because it's called Hungry Jack's in Australia.